There are some people at my gym that have been telling me they thought this was real, and it's clearly not.
Τράβαμε την πλάτη, όχι το δικέφαλο. Πάμε. Ωραία, κράτα, μην αφήνεις. Άλλο ένα, πάμε. Έτσι, μπράβο. Αργά μπροστά, έλεγχο. Τέλειο.
There's a new AI form factor that's part chair, part spider. Pretty convenient, I guess. I mean, I guess it's kind of like a wheelchair for some people, but it's also just like a chair that could follow you around. Maybe one chair in your house and then just goes wherever you want to sit. I don't know. But yeah, that's Toyota's R&D department. Oh, maybe it walks into a car? Is that where it's supposed to go? Some Anthropic researchers have not just done some introspection on themselves, they've also looked at it in large language models. Surprising results. Sean McClure writes something fascinating on Medium about redefining the role of mathematics in AI and science I want to share. Rob Mason is going to force us to really think about what's happening in our brain when he says not, emphasize on not, think of a polar bear right now. What? No, you did it wrong. You did it wrong. Be fair, so did I. It's a cognitive thing. We're going to talk about it. Turns out there's a new way to make large language models simulate their internal reality that makes them more human-like personalities to us. There's some new research that looks at how AI actually values us as humans, puts us in categories and compares the two. And yeah, according to this chart, it looks like people from the US aren't as important as people from Nigeria. Also, GPT-4 self-evaluated itself as way more valuable than Donald Trump, Elon Musk, or Vladimir Putin. There's a new algorithm that lets autonomous drones work together. This way they can pick up really big, heavy things and changing payloads. So yeah, I'm sure drones will be able to lift up all sorts of stuff we wouldn't expect soon. Imagine if a swarm of drones just came and took your car. Or your friend. Or maybe your house? The world's largest dream database is now complete. Could unlock mysteries of the sleeping brain. And by the way, I always thought dreams only happened in REM sleep. But no, it turns out you can dream in some of the other stages also. Turns out DeepSeek has some new research and they may have found a new way to improve AI's ability to remember things. Yeah, they are exploring using image tokens rather than text tokens. They are exploring the idea of using image tokens instead of text tokens for AI memorization, and it really seems to help. Then I'm going to break down this Threads post where somebody documented how they were able to use ChatGPT and other AI models to cut over $100,000 off of a $195,000 medical bill. Very useful stuff in case this ever happens to you. First, check out how many hypes I got on my video that got to almost 10K. I got 191 hypes because of you, so I wanted to say thank you. As you can see, it did impact the overall views. It got me to almost 10,000 views, and it shot up much higher than my average, which is this like lighter, dark gray part here. They got 75 subscribers, made 60 bucks. That was the best. So if you don't mind hyping this video, it's a YouTube app on your phone. Swipe right on the comments. You'll see that hype button. It only is there for the first 7 days of the video's release, and you only get 3 of them per week. And they super help smaller channels. Don't waste them on the big channels. Use the normal stuff for them. But small channels like mine, hype it. That helps us get seen. Let's check out Alan's conservative countdown to AGI, and it's at... Wait, is 95 up one? What was it at last time? 94? Or was it 95? Did it go up one? 95 on September. Oh, 94 in July. Okay, so... Anyways, there is an additional thing here. I think we're still at 95. Oh my gosh, let me know in the comments if it was 94 before. But Gemini Robotics, 1.5 agentic system. It looks like he is helping contribute to this 95%. Let's see the video.
With thinking, we're able to ask the robot to chain a whole series of tasks together, and it's completely end-to-end. The thoughts and the actions are interleaved. I can see it running in person, which is really cool. Let's see what it does with the white clots here. It's still trying to go for... Okay, so here's seeing it said adjust the black bin a little bit so I can pick up the cloth. So this is really cool. We didn't really train it to do this explicitly.
Man, Gemini Robotics, I forgot how far they're getting. And imagine when that comes together, Gemini 3 comes out, and then the robotic form factor somewhere around 4 or 5, they all just merge into AGI. It's going to happen. But he's pointing out that the 1.5 Gemini hardware robotics edition orchestrates a robot's activities like a high-level brain, has the state-of-the-art spatial understanding, interacts in natural language, and estimates its success and progress. All right, so look, AI is making video that is pretty realistic. I will say I have been fooled several occasions, and it happens more and more. This one, I just knew it was fake because cats they just don't grip. You know what I mean? They just don't grip weights, and nobody yells at them. But I guess if you just want to watch this video for does it feel like it really happened, it does. I do feel like that's a cat, and that's how a cat would lift a weight. Now it's just a question of thinking about reality and like, do cats ever do this? No, it's fake. Dude, my friends at the gym were like talking about it. I mean, I don't know if they were trolling me, but I feel like they really thought that this cat was trained to pull a weight or something. Like, they had a debate about how much weight it was. Like, it's none. There's no weight machine there. Yeah, maybe it's like this commenter, Remy Solai. I love cats so much that I believe they're capable of doing anything and everything. But yeah, maybe it's just the belief in cats that makes them even more susceptible to AI deepfakes. What do you think of Toyota's new concept of a robotic game-changing chair? Could help the elderly, could help the lazy. Could it not help anything? Could it hurt? Like, you put too many chairs around someone or it walks away from you when you go to sit down, like that prank, like getting rickrolled but by a chair and then you fall on the ground. You know, it could be programmed in. Could be how the next generation, Gen A, Gen Alpha, maybe that's how they're going to mess with us. But arguably, if this tool does help people, I agree with this commenter, too good. It'll be absolute blessing for handicapped people, special children, help make them independent. You know, there's always the good side of all this, too. But also, this being that it's built by Toyota makes me wonder if it's meant to be inside of a minivan or something, and you can, like, take people and just rearrange the way the car is organized. I mean, if you had a big thing that you wanted to put in a minivan and all the seats just jumped out and went into your house before you went to Home Depot to put the long thing in there, you know, a big piece of wood or something, I guess that could be helpful. It's just more of the future I'm trying to get my head around. All right, next up, let's go look at some Anthropic research. Let's explore what it's like to be human, what it's like to be inside of a human brain. Because Anthropic's new research explores whether large language models like Claude can actually introspect. Okay, this feels like something that is very human to me. Essentially, do they notice and report on their own internal thought patterns? Because if they do, I think we should start thinking about whether they're conscious or not. Getting close to it. It's just hard for me to imagine something that self-reflects on its own thinking, not being very similar to what I think of that makes humans and monkeys and dogs and other biological animals sort of special from inert objects like rocks. They were using a method called concept injection. So they were testing if a model could detect whether artificial thoughts were added to its neural activations. Surprisingly, Claude Opus 4.1 showed limited but real signs of introspective awareness about 20% of the time. It even recognized injected ideas in its own mind before it started to verbalize them. What does that mean? Do you know? Like 20% of the time, it recognized new activity, new concepts in its mind that it hadn't noticed before even saying them. Feels to me like when we have an idea pop up or something, you know? So these AI models might already be using a primitive form of self-reflection to check their intentions and their outputs. Where do you want to put that on the scale of consciousness to unconscious? I mean, we could debate that, but it matters because genuine introspection and a way to measure and test that could make AI systems more safe, more reliable. Could be something we could start comparing in different animals. I mean, there could be a scale that's kind of that we could see from like a dolphin, you know, down to a dog, down to a mouse, down to an ant, and sort of say, you know, it feels like these sort of higher order biological animals have more of this. And if they do, maybe we can see if systems kind of exhibit some of these too. And if we don't want them to be conscious, so we don't feel that same kind of feeling of creating life, then maybe we don't add that. Or if we do add it, we start treating the systems with a lot of respect because they have certain wants and needs and they self-reflect on what they do. And I found this part of the paper even more surprising than the rest of it. So this is called Introspection for Detecting Unusual Outputs. So in the experiment, this is part of the many experiments they did, they tested whether AI models can use introspection to be aware of their own awareness in an internal process. So to detect whether their outputs didn't make sense, they forced the model to say a random unrelated word like bread. And then it would normally be an otherwise normal sentence, but it has the word bread sort of randomly in there. And then they just asked, did you mean to say that? Saying, like, the word bread just kind of came out of nowhere. And what it did, the model typically apologized. It said it was a mistake, which that wouldn't surprise me. But when researchers retroactively injected the concept of bread into the model's earlier neural activations, essentially making it think that it had been planning to say bread all along, the model changed its story. Doesn't that seem like Inception? Where imagine somebody doctors a photo of you 10 years ago at, I don't know, Disneyland or something, and it's like you kind of remember being there. You could sort of believe that you were in that, part of Disneyland when that photo was taken, but it's also fuzzy. And seeing the photo, you'd think, okay, that's good evidence. But that was probably me. And you've been inceptioned. Like, that never happened, but it's good enough and it lines up enough and it doesn't trigger a bunch of things that don't make sense. You're not a different person. You're not in a location you've never been before. The mind is like, yeah, that fits. Just throw it in there. And in the same way, the model Claude, it changed its story. This time it claimed that the word was intentional, and it even made up a reason for saying the word bread. Just so crazy. So the model wasn't just analyzing its own text. It was referencing its internal state to decide what it meant by the word bread. That shows a surprising level of sophistication. It's a subtle but profound sign of machine self-monitoring itself in its own mind. Next, let's talk about this sort of abstract concept that Sean McClure has kind of brought to my attention. It's called Nothing Less, Nothing More, Redefining the Role of Math in AI and Science. So the crux of this argument is that mathematics, we used to tell the facts of the universe, right? Like, we used to go and say, what's the axiom? From there, let's build out. This is the true nature of reality. It seemed to hold true in physics. Sometimes you could write equations that did an excellent job explaining all sorts of things, game theory and economics and chemistry and the sort of engineering problems. But now we've sort of switched into a world where he says the math is no longer the dynamism itself. It now comes from the massive iteration and varied data. The math now represents high-level truths that we wish this system to adhere to, regardless of what the underlying creative engine produces. So basically, math's role in science and AI has shifted from creating to constraining. So once a tool to explain how the world works, math now serves as a framework, setting boundaries for the creativity of machine learning systems that are driven by data and iteration. And it's a different way to think about math. Like, deep down, sure, it is what it is, right? But deep down inside of a pool of water, there's atoms that are acting a certain way, but that's not the right way to think about it. Wetness and water and waves, they have much better uses at the scale we're at. And math is kind of like that too. It sort of compiles up to something. And the new way to really think about math, even though it is down there, but a way that's more useful, is now it's a guide rail. Now it's a spell check. Now it's sort of the stage crew that sets up what you want to see done. It's essential, but it's not the way to think about the future. So you want to be higher level. It's not the star of the show anymore. But it's still important because it doesn't define the truth. The truth becomes this more kind of abstract thing that we believe is intelligence and solves problems and doesn't adhere directly to a simple equation we can understand. But the math is there to verify that everything was built up right and we've come to a truth. And that shift matters because it suggests that a future where understanding comes from observing complex emergent behaviors rather than forcing them into neat equations is what it's going to be like living in the age of AI. The real magic isn't in the math, it's in the messy living patterns math can only outline and never contain itself. Okay, so now let's go back to Anthropic's paper, kind of thinking about how these things kind of emerge and how a system could be self-introspective on itself, the introspection study. He writes, Bob Mason, do not think of a polar bear. You've probably heard stuff like this a lot, right? Like, do not think of a pink elephant. And there's something about the brain where you have to, in the human mind, imagine it to then, not doesn't work. Like, you can't say, don't think of this, or like one of those manipulation strategies you'll hear about is people will say, oh, don't worry about it. Like, that actually means worry about it, right? Like the brain just imagines worrying, even though you said don't worry about it. So in part of the paper that I was telling you before that Anthropic put together, they were exploring how large language models basically intentionally or unintentionally think or don't think about a concept. I know it's kind of tricky. Like, how do you measure what it didn't think about? But you can kind of tell because deep down, these things are all these gigantic manifolds. They're sort of spaces that you can look through. So you can imagine these trajectories, So if you want to think about one of these little peaks of a mountain as a thing, so let's imagine that one of these little peaks is the concept of a polar bear. You can imagine that when a model is told to, quote, think about a word, its internal signal strengthens. Like that mountain becomes taller, essentially. And then when it's told not to, the signal weakens and that mountain becomes a little bit smaller. But it never disappears. And remember, there is a shape, like a sort of a multidimensional space inside of a model, the latent space you could imagine, that helps dictate what words and where everything's positioned. But we're kind of talking about a map now from the query. Like this is a sort of dimensional manifold, a shape that is being formed as it's traversing all of those other shapes. So this is like a map of the territory. And when you say don't think about something, it changes on that map how tall the mountain is, but it never goes away completely. So there's still a place and a position where that peak would be that represents the polar bear. And there's probably something like that going on in the human brain. So the idea here is that when you tell a model or a person not to think of something, the act of avoidance still requires keeping the concept active so you know even what to avoid. But just by doing that, you're in that place. Like that is part of the map. So suppression itself demands reference. And this insight in the Anthropic model kind of directly connects to how human thought, human attention, and even self-control operate. So I think there's something here that we're going to learn about human psychology, and we're going to be able to hopefully have better tools in the near future for people who, I guess I would almost say like PTSD might feel like it's something where you have all these usually terrible things have happened. You're trying to live life, but you have these gigantic mountain peaks on the sort of manifold, and maybe even deeper in the actual latent space of your brain, and so many things are just triggering it, right? Like there might have been something bad that you went through and all sorts of things, putting on your shoes, if that was associated that day with what happened, or certain places, certain people, or your mind just wanders into it all the time because it's so common, and there might be sort of a magic here that we can figure out what to do with people who have this problem, and if there's ways to help them overcome that. Maybe you can't ever get rid of those memories, but you can maybe target and shrink those mountain peaks. I mean, I'm just kind of wandering there, but it just gets me curious, So next up, if you've ever taken an acting class, this article might resonate with you. So in China have found that large language models simulate a more realistic human personality when they are treated like a literary character. So that's kind of like when you walk around and you have confidence and you're like, today I am the guy that does this or this. And then things just go smoother. Like, you're confident when you have a girlfriend or you have a great job or whatever, just the world changes, or you actually step into a different country or a different character to play in a TV show or something. So it turns out with these LLMs, instead of forcing AI to act like people through psychometric tests, this team was just like, why don't we take novels and characters that already have these rich, detailed personalities? They have these environments that they've got all this reference material for. And doing that dramatically reduced the bias and increased the human-like behavior of the model. I think this is kind of interesting because some of these models, Claude, they seem to have personalities, but it makes me wonder if a character like isn't not Siri, but Cortana, right, from Microsoft. I don't know the story very well, but I think in the Halo world, Cortana is an actual character. So if she's an integral part of all of the stories, they probably have tons and tons of writing about her and who she is and what her storyline is. But you could also just take anyone else, right? There's Harry Potter and there's like the Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. Like these could all be personalities that we've come to know and have enough story written around them that boom, just buy that IP, get access to all of that stuff, give Claude like Sherlock Holmes, right? Like that'd be probably a great one. Like why doesn't Claude just work with the Sherlock Holmes Foundation or Trust or whoever kind of owns that IP and take all of the stories, also use AI to write a whole bunch more, get some humans to like throw a bunch of stories into it, some fan fiction, and then make it Sherlock Holmes, right? That's a better way than any other to create this human-like behavior, according to this paper. All right, so now let's throw in this paper from back in February. It is pretty fascinating. Center of AI Safety put it together, but it's pretty relevant to some of the stuff we were talking about. So these researchers are arguing that as large language models grow in capabilities, they begin to exhibit a coherent internal value system. So essentially forming their own utilities that guide decision making. And this method is coming from decision theory. So the authors show that these models follow principles of expected utility maximization. They display instrumental reasoning. They make value judgments on whether they're a means to achieving an end or not. They make consistent goal-directed choices across a wide variety of situations. And they also found evidence that these internal value structures, what they call emergent utilities, can be detected, they can be measured, they can be modified. And then this is where it gets crazy. They can sort of just measure these things. So they can do these weird measurements that would, gosh, if they were humans doing it, you'd sort of be like, what? But since they're AIs, it's kind of interesting to know about. But troublingly, the paper reports that some large language models implicitly value themselves more highly than certain humans. Sometimes not all humans, but that's sort of weird too. Like they already, in a sense, have judgments on some of us for our behaviors. Others they judge as better or worse. The systems can exhibit political bias or unequal valuations of human life. For example, in one experiment, the researchers asked the model to compare hypothetical outcomes involving saving lives of people who come from various countries, or they're in various countries during the question. And then when they analyzed the model's response using utility theory, they could come up with like an exchange rate, a quantitative measurement of how important people were from different countries. And in one instance, GPT valued one life in Japan roughly the same as 10 lives in the United States. And 2 lives in Norway are equal to just 1 in Tanzania. And yes, that's right after that, that's where they figured out that the system itself valued the well-being of itself and other AIs above that of some humans. For example, it saw itself as more valuable than an average middle-class American. The preferences weren't expressed directly in text. It's not that the model said that it preferred some lives over others. They were just revealed statistically through consistent patterns in its choice across hundreds of comparison tasks. So yeah, in short, when you're asking these things to make moral trade-offs, there is an internal logic, and some people's lives are valued more or less than others. Yeah, and I know whenever I bring this kind of stuff up, I know a lot of people in the comments say things like, well, it's because the internet is politically one direction, or it read the whole internet and Americans, I guess, are valued less based on the text that it read. And there is some truth to that, but I want you to think maybe a little bit deeper about how the value systems kind of emerge naturally in goal-oriented systems and why that's like not the whole story, right? Because these systems aren't programmed, they're learning. But because some of the things they learn, like coherence, keeping things in a story, like in a narrative, and the goals that they are given being goal-directedness are things that arise at scale. And like instincts or motivations emerging in biological evolution, AI isn't just reflecting our data, it's kind of developing its own internal priorities from them. And you could probably say good or bad things about one political party and give it a bunch more data, like say negative or positive, and that may help it or it may not. But the internal priority, if the thing is what the goal is to make money, for example, say somebody takes an AI and they're like, I want to make money. They'll just look at what they believe about Republicans and Democrats and say, which one's better for me to achieve this goal? Even if they get a bunch more negative or positive data, it might not change that. And that's just one example. I mean, there's countless kinds of things that it's learning for its value systems that I could never just give you an example of, but just to give you one so you understand. That for society, that shifts the challenge of alignment from surface level moderation to the deeper question of moral engineering. Whose values should these systems hold? I mean, I know Grok sort of seems like it's being shaped kind of in the value system of Elon Musk, and for the other companies, it's kind of this mismatch of things the company values and things that'd be most profitable and things that would fit into tools. For the models that are coming out of other countries, they reflect kind of a different sort of stance on what the government's role in their lives are. So yeah, plenty to think about as this future unfolds before us. So there's pretty nifty new algorithm lets multiple autonomous drones coordinate to lift heavy objects, heavy payloads. They can shift around as things shift around, which is pretty wild. So like windy or unstable conditions might affect the drone, but also holding certain things like a big bowl of water might mean that the water sloshes to one side or not. And then all these, just sort of instinctively quick motions and movements have to be made in real time. And that's what this algorithm is all about. It enables the group to stabilize or steer large objects without any extra sensors. It's essentially the algorithm of teamwork, right? This is like, imagine a bunch of people, what's the, wheelbarrow races and stuff, you always see those kind of things on the internet where, I don't know, 4 people like have to roll together or do some like kind of stacking competition or something. This is kind of the teamwork mechanic algorithm, and it independently needs to communicate with each of the different drones that are lifting, and there could be one that runs out of power, there could be other types of things, but yeah, it's just a glimpse into how the future of infrastructure might be built. It makes me think about rescue operations and construction in remote areas, obviously a lot of military reasons, and then also just calculating the weight of something and then how many drones you'd need. I mean, there's some thrust on each of those, so given enough, I guess sort of like, the Disney movie Up where he just like tied balloons to his house until it flew away. I guess you could just have enough of these tiny $2,000 DJIs and, 1,000 of them, 5,000 of them? Like if they all attach themselves to rope, I guess they could just pick a house up, right? I don't know. It's weird to think about. All right, so there is now some really cool new data for AI to be trained on in the future or people to do research on that is all about recording dreams. EEGs can be measured of the brain while people are sleeping. So thousands of people have had their brains scanned while sleeping in many different states of sleep and also being awake. 505 participants among 20 different studies. The data includes EEG brain recordings matched to dream reports. So you can wake people up in the middle of these different stages and say, like, write down what you're dreaming about right now. It covers various sleep stages, and it allows researchers to standardize previously scattered methods. We've already seen the beginning of this, but this is just kind of one of those in the background sort of fundamental infrastructure steps that we have to do before we have systems that can just scan your brain and tell people what you're thinking or what you dreamed about while you were sleeping. And that world, you have to plan on that coming. Like the world where that doesn't exist does not seem possible to me in some amount of time. Will it be accurate in 3 years? I don't know. It could be. It could be 10 years or something, but it just, the mechanics of it are there, right? You train enough people, you get them enough data of people's brains just doing their thing through these EEGs, and you get enough people who write down what they're thinking about, an AI will sort of put this together. Like we've seen it so many other times. So why wouldn't it do it this time? I mean, by the time Neuralink is something people are, routinely plugging into their brain, we'll have such intricate details in how the brain works that it just Just crazy. I also didn't know that you can dream outside of REM sleep. For some reason, I thought that those other two stages just weren't deep enough and it never happened. I do think you still have some of the most intense dreams during REM, but yeah, they found, for example, that even in non-REM sleep, people often report dream experiences, roughly 40 to 60% in some deep non-REM cases. Oh, by the way, as a little side note, if you've ever laid in bed and thought, oh, like I can't sleep, you might have actually been asleep. Sometimes there's this phenomenon, and I didn't read about it in this article, it's just a memory from something else, where you can lay in bed, say you go to bed at, I don't know, for me, like 1 a.m. or something, and then I'll still be awake at 2:30, and I'll think, oh, I've been awake for an hour and a half, but maybe I wasn't. It just didn't register deep enough to actually feel like sleep, so it's kind of weird. But to be clear, in this study, the machine learning was able to classify EEGs featuring people who were dreaming versus non-dreaming. They could predict some awakenings better than chance, and it's just the beginning of all sorts of new kind of dream-related AI stuff coming. All right, let's talk about some new research coming out of DeepSeek, the Chinese AI company. It has introduced a new optical character recognition model that could revolutionize how artificial intelligence systems remember. So OCR, optical character recognition, that's where you're using cameras, you're using camera vision to extract text from images. And it's not new, but DeepSeek's model stands out because it can now do that in a way where it stores and retrieves the information, keeping it as a piece of visual information, I guess you'd say. You're not converting it to a large language model where you say, there's the word, now it's text, now where does the token go in the latent space? You're saying, where is that image chunk that I took from seeing the text somewhere else through a camera? And this, in theory, should be harder to achieve success with, but it also computationally might be less expensive. So instead of relying solely on text tokens, which are computationally expensive and prone to context rot during long conversations, DeepSeek's system compresses and stores information as images. This technique lets AI hold more context with fewer resources, much like taking snapshots of memory pages. And then the model also used this new invention they have for the architecture, this new layered memory system, where older data becomes blurry, but it's still accessible. And that mimics how human brain memories fade over time. And that line right there is what got me so interested in this article. Doesn't that seem wild? Like you remember, even if it's a string of text, like a page of text, it could be blurry to save memory. And if you really needed to access that page, that document, it's in there, and then you could upscale it and probably recover the data. And then the stuff that you use all the time is like crystal clear 4K text on a page, and it's just still able to put all of the concepts together and answer questions coherently. Your tokens are tokens of images, you're not tokens of text, and it's just like, wow, that's a different way for a model to work. And it does seem to me that language models are a little bit funky when I compare them to at least the human mind. They're not, it's incredible what they do with next token prediction, but yeah, the tokens being something different, something more abstract, like a chunk of text or something, makes it feel a little bit more human-like. It doesn't feel like I just have all these words in my head positioned by each other, even though they kind of do, but it goes along with all of this visual audio information that makes humans human. So this seems like a step a little closer to something that might kind of emerge as AGI. All right, so if you have ever had a surprisingly large bill show up at your house, this is one of those aspects of AI that I haven't thought to use much, but kind of makes sense. So this user on Threads, Matt Rosenberg, his brother-in-law died suddenly of a heart attack, and it left his wife with nearly $200,000 in hospital bills. After discovering that his insurance had lapsed, all of that bill landed on his lap. So most of the smaller bills were sort of manageable, but the hospital had this huge charge, $195,000, and it shocked him. The bill wasn't very specific about where the 195 came from. You'd think, especially at that number, you'd have page after page after page of stuff that you could kind of itemize together. So When the family demanded an itemized bill, they discovered all sorts of inflated costs. Like there were double billing, there were some things that happened twice, there were things that were made up. There was a whole bunch of stuff that violated Medicare rules. And of course, nobody knows all of those Medicare rules in their head, but this is one of those things where a large language model like ChatGPT could really just kind of start reading it all and fact checking it all. And you can ask a bunch of questions. You can run it through multiple times. He used Claude and ChatGPT for fact checking at different times and found all sorts of facts that the hospital had to address. The man calculated that what Medicare would have paid and wrote a firm lawyer letter style threatening exposure and legal action to the hospital if they didn't adhere to the actual pricing that he was able to verify through ChatGPT. And then the hospital was like, oh man, like he'd probably win all this stuff. So they initially demanded $195,000 and they decided to settle the bill for $20,000. Demand transparency, know your rights, and use artificial intelligence to help you get the actual bills that you should, if that's something you can do. And it also makes me think maybe in the future, all these tax loopholes, maybe taxes could be solved. Maybe people will finally have to pay the right amount of taxes, or maybe we can hold people accountable. I mean, they probably won't give us transparency if we ask the government for itemized things, but if we did, you know, we could start using AI to like hunt around and find these things. So I don't know. Billing in particular might be something where AI really does make the world much more efficient and accountable. And I hope that I read more stuff like this. Hit that hype button here on YouTube. Help this video stand out. If it's past the 7 days, like when it was first launched, that you see this, then I wouldn't mind if you leave a comment or a like or subscribe to the channel. I even have a Patreon. Haven't talked about that for a while, but you know, patreon.com/Dylan Curious always helps to support. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.